We are live. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give us a few moments. Sorry for the 7:01 welcome here. I'm just going to give us a moment before I kick off and officially kind of start this event. I hope everyone's feeling great today. Tuesday, a happy Tuesday in Philly. This is my chatter before I actually start the event. So, this is the warm up. Okay. Wow, quite a few guests. I'm so excited. Welcome, everyone. Okay. You know what? I am just going to jump right in and go for it. I know I see still we have people joining us, but I want to say hello and welcome to the 215 Festival. I am Anju Triohan, one of the programming coordinators for this year's festival, and we are so excited that you joined us tonight. I want to take a moment and thank our sponsors. I think they were on screen for just a moment, but they'll flash back up. Rutgers, Lanternfish Press, and the Stables. Thank you very much. The festival would not be possible without your support. I am very pleased to introduce Adam Vickovich of the popular podcast Debutiful, who will be in conversation with our authors this evening. Adam is a Denver-based writer. He launched Debutiful in January 2019 and has since interviewed over 200 debut authors. So when you're looking to discover notable debut titles and learn more about the authors behind those works, head over to Debutiful. You can access his website at debutiful.net and listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. Before I turn it over to Adam, I just want to share, please note you can opt to have closed caption on or off during the event. And please feel free to comment and share your thoughts in the chat. We would love to hear from you. Be active and involved. We would love to hear your comments as we hear from our authors and hear the reading. And also feel free to submit questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll be able to kind of pull some of those questions into the event towards the end. With that, Adam, welcome. I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. We have three amazing debut authors. Two of their books are out, and then we have one who's releasing a book. I'm going to introduce all three and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of get into a nice discussion about the debut hustle, genre, craft, everything you want to know from what debut authors are going through right now. I guess we're in a post-COVID world, almost. Today's authors are Mary Dixie Carter. Her writing has appeared in Time, The Economist, San Francisco Chronicle, and she has an MFA in creative writing from the New School. Her debut novel, The Photographer, is out now. You can get it at bookstores now. Congratulations, Mary Dixie Carter. Our next author and reader is Claire Cox. She is a writer and high school teacher originally from San Diego. She has her MFA from Hunter College Prize and was published in the Missouri Review. Her first novel, Silver Beach, won the Juniper Prize for fiction and is out now via UMass Press. You can get Silver Beach out now. I love seeing these books out there. And our next and final reader will be Rachel Yoder, whose book Night Bitch is not out yet. This is hot off the presses. She is a graduate of the Iowa Nonfiction Writer Program and also holds an MFA in fiction from the University of Arizona. Her writing has been awarded with the Editor's Prize of Fiction at the Missouri Review. Like I said, Night Bitch is not out. It's out July 2021, and it's already been optioned for film to star Amy Adams. Thank all three of you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you
for having us.
It is exciting to have all three of you. And what I want to start with is just have you give us the synopsis of your book and kind of explain what it's about. Mary Dixie Carter, what is The Photographer? I think she's frozen. We're going to go to Claire Cox. Claire, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. You were supposed to go second. Tell us a little bit about Silver Beach.
Silver Beach is the story of what happens when two
estranged sisters reunite very awkwardly in the aftermath of their mother's heart attack. And basically their mother's alcoholism has become catastrophic. So they've spent their whole lives apart, which was owing to a family tragedy that kind of split their family apart. And they get back together to try and figure out if they can take care of each other, what they owe each other, and if anybody can save anybody else.
Perfect. And we'll have you read a little bit from it later and get a little more in depth to it. Rachel, tell us a little bit about Night Bitch.
Sure. So Night Bitch is the protagonist is an artist turned very reluctant stay-at-home mom who never planned to be a stay-at-home mom. And one day she becomes convinced that she's turning into a dog. And so it really focuses on the challenges and frustrations of contemporary motherhood, and is looking at a lot of the tensions that were really thrown into stark relief during COVID when we were all suddenly at home and wondering how to make careers and parenting work at the same time. So it's just kind of looking at that, but with a very bonkers energy, as my editor would say, with this kind of crazy doggish transformation at the center of it.
And it comes, like I said, it comes out in July. I can't wait for people to read it. It is such a, like you said, bonkers. Mary Dixie, I believe you're back and unfrozen. Could you tell us a little bit more about the photographer?
Yes, I apologize that my screen froze up. The photographer is about Delta Dawn, who is the photographer. She takes pictures of wealthy New Yorkers and their children. And at the opening of the book, she goes to the home of Amelia and Fritz Straub to photograph their daughter Natalie's 11th birthday party. And she falls in love with this family. She becomes obsessed with this family. And the book tells the story of her trying to insinuate herself into the family.
Yeah, and I want to start with this, and this will just be open up to all three of you. All three books, I was really excited that these became part of the panel because they're all wildly different. They're all tonally different, stylistically different, and genre, which is something that's been really on my mind. Did you all three, and Mary Dixie, you can start, set out thinking about genre, or did that come secondary to the characters of the story?
I did not set out to write a thriller, and everyone told me it was a thriller once it was written. So I'll answer the question by telling you how I got the idea, which the thriller part came out of the character of Delta Dawn largely. I hired a photographer to take pictures of my two children, who are now 10 and 8, but this was a few years back. And the pictures came back and they were beautiful, but the children's eyes were cobalt blue, and they're not in real life. And I said to the photographer, I'd like for my children's eyes to be their real color. And she said, there is no real color. And I was so struck by that. I found that idea fascinating, and also just the psychology behind it, that there is no real color, there is no real, and then extrapolate out and there is no real anything. And that's, I think, a mindset that we've seen it more and more over the last 3, 4, 5 years. But so I was interested in this person. I was interested in this character, Delta Dawn, who's the first person narrator, and sort of followed her and her like crossing boundaries and having no sense of what was real and what's in her imagination, having no sense of like what's appropriate or not, and or if she does have a sense of it, she doesn't abide by any of it. She just proceeds to break all the boundaries that exist. And then the other thing I think, you know, thinking about this question of genre and why my novel is a thriller, or why everyone calls it a thriller, which I'm happy about, but it wasn't exactly my intention, is that I have a theater background. I was an actor, and I read many, many plays over the years. And I wonder if I come to writing a novel with this sense of like, this needs to move along really quickly and like escalate the tension really quickly, because in the theater, there's a limited amount of time. You really need to get on with it. And as an actor, you really have to, like, that's sort of I viewed it as my job to escalate the tension. So I don't know for sure that that's how it ended up being a thriller, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, and there's a comment in the chat about how genre is limiting, and that's kind of where we're going with this. Claire, before we get there though, I guess how did Silver Beach unfold and become tonally what it was? Because like when you were giving the synopsis, yeah, it's a downer, I guess you could say. But how did
It's the happiest, saddest novel you'll read in some time, according to one of my blurbs.
There you go. So how did Silver Beach kind of unfold?
You know, I kind of got the idea for this novel from an episode of This American Life, which is, I don't know, kind of funny to tell. There's a really incredible episode from a number of years ago called Duty Calls by Joshua Bearman. And it's about how he travels across the country to go help his younger half brother and his mother, who just seem kind of incapable of having their act together. They just need a lot of support. And meanwhile, he had this like very kind of normal, stable upbringing with his father in California. And his brother is a petty criminal, and his mother is a catastrophic alcoholic. And so it really, it just haunted me, this story. There was a role reversal of parent and child. There was this really stark chasm of class and culture within the same family. There was I don't know how to put this. Like, I think some really deep part of me is afraid of just sort of like spiraling out of control, which is why I'm very like nailed down, I think, in my own life. But the younger sister, who I usually describe in my novel, I usually describe her as a stoner fuck up. She's kind of like my worst fear embodied. And there's a very her sister is just on the surface very in control of her life, and they're both deeply unhappy and in a really deep state of grief because of what happened when they were children, and all of that is invented and has nothing to do with This American Life. But the seed of it was just from this the way you can leave your family so far behind, but they're still related to you, and what do you owe them, and what can you do for them, if anything?
And whereas people can say Mary Dixie's book is a thriller, have you noticed people saying, well, like your blurb is the happiest sad novel? Are people trying to box in your novel in any sense? Do you see that?
I haven't seen that. I think I was afraid that because it was called Silver Beach, that it would be marketed in a kind of a women's fiction kind of way. And women's fiction is a totally legitimate category of book, but I don't think that's what this is. So I was really concerned about cover design. I was like, no footprints on a beach. but there wasn't, I think that its launch has been quiet enough that I didn't have to worry too much about it being marketed in a particular way. So I've sort of gotten to define it myself.
Yeah. And then Rachel, your book, when I'm describing it to friends and future readers, I just don't know how to describe it necessarily. I guess bonkers, like you said earlier, is probably the best way to describe it. How did Night Bitch come about? Were you writing a specific way on purpose, or did it kind of all unfold naturally?
Yeah, I mean, it arose out of, you know, a very real and frustrating experience of early motherhood that I had, and of being a reluctant stay-at-home mom. And, you know, it kind of poured out after having not written for a number of years. I was so angry. I was so angry. And then Trump got elected, and I got even angrier. And my husband offhandedly taught, you know, he's very sarcastic. We have a very joke-filled marriage. I hadn't slept in a number of years, and he was, you know, I was prone to being very grumpy in the middle of the night when woken up. And one morning he's like, "You were sort of like a night bitch last night." Um, and so it started out as this joke, which felt like very provocative and resonant in a certain way. And I knew that I was so angry that if I was going to write about early motherhood, it was going to have to be, you know, balanced out with humor. Um, and I like things that are bonkers. Like I like John Waters, I like Harmony Korine, I like Fleabag and Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And um, it just felt like something that, even though the mom may or may not turn into a dog, it felt very emotionally true. If that makes, it felt like it was heightening reality rather than, and heightening like an emotional truth of her experience rather than taking a turn, you know, into, you know, hard fantasy or sci-fi or something. And those are my favorite kind of things to read too. I mean, I love Carmen Maria Machado, and what she's kind of like done for this whole vein of writing. I like things that are very realistic, but then tipped a little bit into the uncanny and into ambiguity. And that's what I was hoping to do rather than kind of saying this is a genre book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the, and I saw in the chat, Susan C asked, does fiction have to have a genre? And I think for me, absolutely not. For publishers and for bookstores, yeah, like they have to know where to put it on the bookshelf, I guess, and how to market it. But for me, it just like having this sort of weird doggish twist really felt like an extension of this like hard reality, like very realistic novel in a lot of ways that I was writing.
Definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head where, and even Mary Dixie talking about how people want to box things in. The artistry of writing is what you all do. The business side of things is what I do, or, you know, with the podcast, I have to like try to get people to read a book, or like, you know, or bookstores. I want to, before we get into the reading, just ask quickly, because I realized as you were talking, and I should have asked this at the beginning, I just want to talk about your process for this book, how long it's been, because I feel a lot of writers who are writing now but haven't published their debut are thinking, I'm going to publish next year. And it's like, well, maybe not. So if you want to briefly just talk about your journey from the beginning of your books to when they were finally published this year. And for you, Rachel, by July.
Are we going in any particular order?
Any order. Yeah, whoever wants to go
I'll
first.
jump in. I started mine in about 2011 when I started my MFA, and I finished it in 2015, this summer before I had my child. And I had this real sense of, I gotta get this done. And I actually rewrote the entire second half that summer in a very methodical way. I'd never been so methodical in my life about writing something. Like I actually was able to outline it before I wrote it. And then I spent a very long time querying, and querying takes forever, querying agents. It takes forever because you want to be really thoughtful and deliberate about who you query. You don't want to just blindly query agents because they can tell. You want to say like, I'm querying you because you represent this person who wrote this book that I read that resonated with me. And I think blah, 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 like I'm going to resonate with you. And most of them don't write you back. Well, that was my experience. And but I ended up getting a lot of really lovely personal rejections from people who said they loved the book, but didn't think they were right to represent it. And I was basically going to give up in 2019. So that was a 4-year process. And my life was also really tumultuous and I had a lot going on otherwise, and was working and parenting and all of that and moving. And then, so I sort of gave up querying agents and just started throwing it at contests because I didn't even realize that was a thing. And then I was like, oh, that's a thing in Poets and Writers. And this is, it was published by one of those contests. So it didn't, like I finished, it was published 5 years after I finished it.
Definitely. And I feel like you're right. I get a lot of emails or some emails from people who are looking for advice. I'm like, listen, I'm not the person to give advice. That's why I interview all these debut authors. And that's a path that I feel like a lot of people don't consider right like until a few years have passed.
Yeah.
Mary Dixie, how about you? What was your timeline and the journey for The Photographer?
Writing The Photographer was about 3 years. I also did it in the sort of second half of my MFA, but I wrote a novel before The Photographer that was not published, and I still like that other novel, and maybe one day it will be published. But so anyway, the 3 years is not really counting the process of, getting an agent and then selling it, and then the lead up. And then, so the 3 years is, I would say more the actual writing of it. And some of that time was extremely focused and some of it was much less focused. I have 2 children, and so there were periods of time where I was able to be, to really buckle down, and other periods of time where I wasn't able to. So yeah, that's
Definitely. How about you, Rachel?
Yeah. So as I said, I didn't write a word for 2
Mhm.
years after my son was born. He was born in 2014. So I was just in a blind panic for 2 years, thinking maybe I wasn't a writer anymore. This is long after both of my MFAs. So 2016, I started writing, and completed it in 2019. And like Claire and like Mary Dixie, I wrote this book in a way I had not written before, which was very focused. Maybe you've heard of Jamie Attenborough's 1,000 Words of Summer, where she kind of guides people through writing 1,000 words for 2 weeks during the summer. And that's really like what boosted me into the book, because after doing that, like going to the coffee shop every day for an hour or 2 and just banging it out, I mean, it was really helpful to have 14,000 words, when I was done with those 2 weeks. It's like, oh, this is great. And then I would, have a few fallow months. And then I would kind of do that again on my own and just say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I'm writing 1,000 words a day, which is not at all how my process has ever been. So I wound up getting these huge chunks of writing bit by bit and building them up and then going back and revising. I did already oddly have an agent. I was going to publish a short story collection that I did write in my MFA with a small press before the small press was found out to be not a great small press. And so that kind of went under. I decided not to turn that into a novel, as my agent would have had me do, and focus on something that felt a lot more urgent and close. And who knows what'll happen to that short story collection. Maybe it, it'll be time to go back to it sometime in the future, but.
Yeah, and the reason I always get into the nitty gritty with debut authors is because no story is the same of how the book got published. I know all three of you mentioned MFAs, but that's not the only path. It's just beautiful to hear that, art can shift in so many ways, and the end product is what is all different. I guess now we're about 30 minutes into this, so let's do a little bit of reading. Mary Dixie Carter, can you read a little bit from your book, The Photographer?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. So I will just start by telling you where we are in the book. Delta is at the Straub's house, and she's babysitting Natalie, the 11-year-old. And Amelia and Fritz, Natalie's parents, are out for the evening. Natalie has gone to sleep, and so Delta is taking this opportunity to look around the house. And she at this moment, she's in the master bathroom.
Awesome. Yeah, take it away, please.
Okay. When finished at the mirror, I turned to take in the magnificence of the bathtub. I'd never bathed in such a tub. I considered how much time I had. It was 10 p.m. The Straubs definitely wouldn't return home before 11, and Amelia had indicated it would be later. If I were to take a bath, I'd have at least an hour before I'd have to worry about their arrival. I pulled my shirt over my head, removed my bra, and examined my torso in the full-length mirror. I still had a flat stomach and a slender waist. I thought about conceiving and bearing a child. Childbirth can alter a woman's body, sometimes permanently. I sat down on an Indonesian stool and pulled off my socks, my jeans, and my underwear, then stood naked in the lavish bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror, savoring a sense of connection and intimacy with the Straubs, and also the power associated with claiming what I needed. I considered the logistics of my bath. I ought not to use a towel for my bath because I might not have time to wash and dry it. They would likely notice a damp towel or a damp tub. Maybe I needed to wait for my next visit and bring my own towel. The thought of postponing the bath brought my spirits down. I spied a damp towel draped over the towel bar and contemplated using that one. I leaned over to smell it and detected Amelia's musky scent. Still undecided, I returned to the bedroom to study the Straub's bed. A dozen pillows of various sizes and fabrics and in various shades of blue covered the upholstered headboard. I wanted to lie naked under their organic cotton sheets. Thoughts of Amelia and Fritz having sex entered into my mind. Maybe they'd stopped having sex after all the miscarriages. Maybe it was too traumatic for them now. Natalie's face appeared in the doorway. Her body lurched back at the sight of me. "Hi, Natalie." I spoke in a calm tone, though a wave of panic ran through me. I spotted a throw draped over a nearby chair. "The craziest thing." I wrapped the blanket tightly around my body. "Just a few minutes ago, Itzhak vomited. I was downstairs and lifting him off the porch. Awful for him, really." I avoided her eye contact. "So all my clothes, I had to clean everything. It was quite a mess, and I'm gonna wash my clothes in the machine. I'll just find a towel until they're dry." "Poor Itzhak." Natalie crossed towards me in the direction of the bathroom. I feared she was going to examine my clothing to see if I was telling the truth about the vomit, but she stopped in front of one of her parents' nightstands to check the time. She turned around and walked back towards the bedroom door. Fortunately, Natalie went back to bed rather quickly after a glass of milk. I was mildly concerned about how she would relate what she saw. She appeared to believe me when I explained about Itzhak, but I couldn't be certain. Still wrapped in the blanket, I returned to the master bathroom where I had left my clothes and sent Amelia a text. Can I use the laundry machine to wash my clothes? Unfortunately, Itzhak's been ill. No, did he ruin your clothes? I'm fine. Please use my bathroom to rinse off. The response allayed all my fears and filled me with the same sense of euphoria that I'd had earlier. I placed my clean clothes in the laundry room, in the laundry machine with detergent. Then when I entered the master bathroom again, it was not as a trespasser, but as an invited guest.
Thank you so much for reading that. And I know we talked about, oh, it's not a thriller, but people are calling it, and it's whatever it is. But even listening to it, it's like, just how you read it, I very much appreciate it. It sounds like I'm on the edge of my seat. I've listened to a lot of authors read, and it's always like a pleasure to just hear how people read their own work. So thank you for that. We'll get into more readings, but I want to open up again, continuing just talking about, again, that debut hustle and how you'll never forget your first book getting there. You all touched upon agents, and I wasn't going to go this way, but I feel maybe it's an important conversation to have and be transparent about, and maybe just talk a little bit about your experience. I know Claire kind of already talked about that, and Rachel already had her agent, but Mary Dixie, when did you know you found the right agent and then found the right editor and publisher eventually? When did you know it was right?
I sent my manuscript to Stephanie Roston, and a friend introduced me to her. So basically a friend introduced me to her, and she responded, and she was in a very enthusiastic way. And I went in to meet with her, and immediately I was like really, really excited and thought, oh, I hope that she wants to represent me. She is so, like, I feel like I just, so I did have another literary agent when as I told you, I wrote another novel. But so I had another literary agent, so I've had another experience, and I can, a little bit of a point of comparison. But I can just say that I feel like it's so blessed. I feel so blessed that I met Stephanie, that she read the book when she did, and that she really got excited about it. And she, took a real interest in working on revising it with me, and she is an excellent editor. So there's so many things that I'm very grateful for, and it all sort of starts with her. And then I feel like so fortunate with my editor and my publisher, my editor, Catherine Richards, and my publisher, Minotaur Books, St. Martin's Press. And it's been, I mean, COVID was a weird period of time for this to be happening. So this whole year was, there were definitely sort of, stressful things about this year, but I feel extremely fortunate to be working with my editor, working with my agent, and the whole team there. But I can say, I did write another novel. It was not published. My agent sent that novel around, and no one bought it. So I have that experience too. So I can be properly grateful, because I know that it doesn't always turn out that way.
And Claire, you already touched upon your experience a little bit, but I mean, and maybe talk a little bit more about, you know, the prize and how that kind of works as opposed to the more traditional publishing sense.
I don't have any experience with a traditional publishing sense, so I guess I don't have a point of comparison. It was pretty straightforward. I sent this manuscript to this contest before its deadline, and then that was in the fall of 2019, and then in January of 2020, I got an email saying it was one of the winners, and I had a cow. um, and then the whole process from there, I actually panicked a little bit because there would be no editor, and I'd always imagined I would work with an agent first to edit it, and then I'd work with an editor, and we would fix everything that was wrong, because I was sure there were lots of things wrong with it, even if I didn't know what they were. And I emailed a number of friends from my program saying, is this weird? Like, should I feel kind of safe putting this book out there without anything, like, is it okay? And some people reminded me, well, they chose it because they read it and they liked it. So I think they probably don't want you to change it. And then, and they told me, like, yeah, that's true. We want it to be the way it is, mostly. But the writing professor who kind of selected it said, I do have one note, you don't have to change it, but the ending, I think that you've kind of earned more than what you have. And I think he was right. And I ended up subtly, but very distinctly rewriting just the last couple of paragraphs, like the last page. So I think it lands better than it did originally. And then I ended up doing a sort of significant edit about 2/3 of the way in that was just my own. I knew it needed to happen, so I got it in before the final draft was due.
Yeah, and then Rachel, you mentioned you had your agent prior to starting Night Bitch. Did you have it that entire time while those 2 years? Yeah, I guess so. The 2 years where you were like, I don't know if I'm a writer anymore. The agent stuck with you. You stuck with the agent that entire time?
Yeah. And I mean, I just told myself, you know, if I don't have anything to sell, then I don't need an agent at this moment. And when it comes time to sell something, she will be there. And what I really loved about Monica and how she was introduced to me, I actually was introduced to her by the editor at the small press who was going to publish my short story collection. And she said, I don't want you to sign, very graciously, I don't want you to sign a contract without an agent looking it over first. And Monica Woods of Triangle Literary, she works with a lot of indie writers who are kind of trying to cross over and, you know, get a bigger publisher. And so her sensibility was very much open to things that were a bit more indie, maybe a bit more experimental, maybe a bit bolder, that might be a little harder to sell. So she was a great agent for me, and also a mom. And yeah, she was just like, I'm here with you, you know, I'm here for your career. When we first talked, she's like, what kind of career do you want to have? Like, she wasn't just there to sell one book. And I, similar to Mary Dixie, I had another agent long ago, back in my 20s, when I, you know, was getting my MFA, and I published a modern love column. And a very traditional old guard agent reached out to me and like wanted me to write a book. I was 25. I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I put together a proposal, which was horrible. I didn't want to write the book. No one wanted my horrible proposal, right? So it was just like this totally different experience. I don't think it was bad because of the agent, but it was just like, she was a very different agent than Monica is. And yeah, that was just kind of, you know, see you later, nice working with you. After that, you know, I decided I didn't want to write a book based on my modern love at the age of 25. Yeah, and so I'm glad that I think I wound up in the right place. You know, with if you look at Monica's list, it's other people doing really interesting stuff, experimental, bold, and that's the perfect agency for me.
Yeah, and like Monica puts out, yeah, like you said, just some of the wildest indie and not indie books, and definitely, yeah.
Yeah. She knows how to sell stuff that has an indie vibe, like where to
Mhm.
place it in the kind of like more mainstream
For
market.
sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then we'll keep on this conversation going. And then I do see that there's some questions already popping up in the Q&A, so I'll moderate those by the end. But for the readers out there, keep asking questions. You can ask more than one. Ask as many as you want. I'll have Claire read from Silver Beach. Claire, what are you going to be reading? And then just dive right into it.
Sorry, of course,
No
I
worries.
take a sip of water and it goes down the wrong pipe. I'm going to
Perfect
be
timing, right?
Yeah. Then I'm going to, something else is going to happen technically. So I'm going to read from the middle of the book, and this is when the older sister, Mara, the one who kind of has her life together, arrives back at the apartment in Silver Beach with her mother, Linda. And it is from the point of view of the younger sister, Shannon, who has been kind of holed up in the apartment after kind of trying to escape and like failing to just run away, basically. And she's been sitting in the apartment smoking all of her friend's weed, her about to be ex-friend. Sleep, wake, smoke, repeat. On what might be the third day, she wakes up at an hour with no shape, just gray light. Noises in the apartment. Why? Who? A wedge of foam between each thought. A surprised voice. A scratchy voice. Women. What women? Are they coming to seize the apartment? Has she been here for months? Blazed on her bed, eating Chex Mix long enough to get herself evicted? She sits up, stares through the window at the oleander for answers, the power lines stretched behind it, the stucco cube across the street, the colorless sky. The voices go on, but she can't make out the words. Hunger pushes her out of bed. Unless she's eaten it, there's a cupboard stocked with shiny bags and boxes of chips, crackers, cookies, puffs, kernels, corners, combos, all the best nouns. Their bright, familiar logos like billboards on the road of her new life. Post Texas, post Brandy, post Linda. She should have kept a journal. There were big thoughts. She can't remember them now. She cracks her door and peers through it, but it's just the voices, no people. Maybe she's dreaming them. Ah, she remembers a big thought. Shame cripples you. Stand tall and be proud of your beauty, even if you're ugly. Was that it? She straightens, squeezes her thighs, throws her shoulders back, and marches into the bathroom. The mirror greets her with a horror. Side ponytail, a halo of bed fuzz, eyeliner, why? A wrinkled t-shirt she doesn't recognize, boxer shorts? Whose boxer shorts? No shame. She'll face the evictors. Maybe the police have come to confiscate her looted weed. Too bad there's none left. They'll repossess her junk food. She threw the credit card in a parking lot trash can when it stopped working, but she could still be arrested. Better maybe to go back to bed. A presence in her bedroom. Unclear how much time has passed. A minute, an hour, a month. Everything is a little sharper, louder, like she took off her headphones. She blinks a crusty eye open. A tall, beautiful woman is staring at her. A linen dress the color of mud. A necklace at her collarbone. A bracelet. One of those women with long, bony limbs who will grow old skinny, who has never been fat. Gray-brown hair that falls to her shoulders. The same family of color as the mud-colored dress, shades you see in a marsh or a beach. Gray-green blue eyes that make Shannon think if you were going to find a pool in a forest that would tell you the future, this is the color. This woman knows her. Shannon opens the other eye and half sits up. The woman sighs. Shannon sits all the way up, crosses her legs. Everything she'd imagined or remembered about Mara is right. She's perfect. She's an adult in a way that Shannon will never, ever be an adult. If Mara makes a rare bad decision, she won't apologize for it. She has a reason, and if that reason is wrong, she'll have you believe it's right. It's a scary authority her sister has, half-sister. Like she doesn't have to work to be in charge, she just is. She's a teacher or something. That makes sense. Mara looks at Shannon's bed, her floor, her piles. She turns around and stares past the oleander. She's looking for somewhere to sit. She folds her arms around her middle, lowers herself to the edge of Shannon's mattress, and it bends toward her weight. I'm not in jail, Shannon says, surprised at her voice. Mara replies. The pieces find each other and form the corner of a jigsaw puzzle. If Mara is here, her mother is here. The owner of the other voice, Linda, alive, possibly with a bedpan, a walker, an IV, a paralyzed face, drool. Shannon is not in Tennessee. She's never going to be friends with Brandy again. Her boss at Rite Aid probably won't give her another chance. She'll have to get a job at CVS. How will she work if her mother is drooling over a bedpan? There's no more weed left. Do you need a minute? Mara asks. Huh? Take a shower? Mara looks around, her eyes stabbing the room's little disasters. Shannon remembers her hunger. The snacks are in the kitchen, which is 100 dragon-filled miles from her bedroom. She reclines and pulls her sheet up over her head, wiggling down. With a gentle but decisive hand, Mara pulls the sheet back. Please get up, take a shower, get dressed, eat lunch with us. You can't say no. Shannon would love to find the one person in the world who could say no to this woman. Mom doesn't eat, Shannon says. Sure she does, Mara says, and rises from the bed, tipping Shannon back toward herself. She's a lot better than I thought she'd be. Mara seems neither pleased nor surprised as she lets herself out and closes the door behind her. A moment later, she opens it again. Shannon has not moved an inch or breathed a breath. It's time, Mara says.
Thank you so much for reading that. Like I complimented Mary Dixie on how she made it so unsettling on the edge of my seat. I know this book, yes, like you said, and going back to that blurb, it is a sad book, but there's just that humor in it that just like alleviates some of that like, oh man, what's going to happen to these people? Something not good probably, but at least I could laugh on this page. I want to open it back up to everyone, and I'll start with you again, Claire, because you touched upon this. I want to talk about the editing process once the book found a home, and you mentioned, there was no editor. You got one note, and then you did touch something near the end, but editing it after it was found a place, did you want to edit it? Did you feel it needed it? Or were you, like, how did that work for you?
I had lost perspective on it. I mean, as you do, I think it's impossible to really have much of a sense of this project you've, built from the inside out. And I think when I didn't find an agent right away, or even after some time, I just was convinced it was fatally flawed and it would have to live in a drawer for the rest of my life, or its life, somebody's life. And I sent it to a friend from my program, and I was like, will you read this and just tell me what's wrong with it? Because I can't see it. And he was always really lucid about my work. And he was like, well, I mean, if I go looking for something, like maybe this thing or this other thing. And looking back, like, I think he was just searching for something to say. And obviously it's not a perfect book, and everyone's sense of it, of any book, is completely subjective. And for whatever reason, it didn't land enough with any of these agents to get picked up. But I sort of lost my train of thought. What? Editing. So yeah, like, I feel really good about it now. It actually seems to cohere and make sense. And I think rewriting that little bit of the ending really helped. So I'm glad I got that note. And I actually think I got a note from a friend who said there are these three characters who are really not fully fleshed out. They're you're going to offend people actually with these characters. Like you're not giving them their full humanity. And she was right. And so I consulted with two dear friends who would really know where these characters were coming from. And I said, like, just tell me, like, help me figure out what to do. And they did. And so these three characters became one character who I think ends up being really important in a small way toward the end of the book. So I do think it's a better book than the one I sent out to query with now. But I didn't work with anyone, you know, with an editor hat.
Sure. And Rachel, what was it like for you? I know your book's not out, so are you still tinkering? Is it done?
Oh, I wish I could still be tinkering, but I'll get no more of that. No, it's done. You know what has really helped me to clearly see the book and to be lucid about the book is trying to adapt it into a script. And let me tell you, all of the flaws of the book, all of the structural, you know, holes, all of the things that sort of fall apart in the plot and the narrative arcs become very apparent as you try to kind of take it and fit it into the highly structured form of a screenplay. So I'm at the, you know, my book hasn't come out yet. So I'm sort of at the point where I'm like, you know, like I wish I could rewrite the end. I wish I could go back and fill out some narrative arcs even more. Like I wish I could go back and work on the structure even more. And I'm sure all authors feel that to some extent at some point. You know, you wish you could go back, and because you do see it better, see it more clearly after time, right? Like after you've stepped away from it. And that's really what I worked on with my agent and my editor, was filling out narrative arcs, making sure, you know, like moving the B story closer to the beginning and giving it a longer time span. Yeah, which is, I mean, you can kind of work on it for an eternity, and when will it ever be done? But yeah, I kind of long for an even more rigorous editing process, which sounds absolutely insane. Or maybe I just kind of long for more time in the publishing process where you can kind of have months to be away from it and then return to it, which would be an utter luxury. But it seems like that is kind of like the only thing that would have helped me to see it more clearly, perhaps.
Mary Dixie, did you have something like Claire where there was one main note that you got, or was it more like Rachel where it was just there was things you need to flesh out, or with I know because we talked about how genre doesn't matter, and it doesn't, but with a thriller, that pace is a big part of it. Did you work on what did you work on after you were with your editor?
The final third is the part that I think, you know, most of her notes were in the final third, and then maybe even like the last 25%. And it was sort of like the build, you know, building towards the end, and also I think she felt that it needed just more pages, actually. Like that last 25% was just also too short in a certain way. So all of her notes, I mean, with hardly any exception, and I appreciated all of my editor's notes and incorporated them. And they were not like, you know, nothing was significant, like a change. It was more add more here, add more here, add more here. And that's something that I, you know, as I was saying before, coming from a theater background, I write in a more spare way, and it's often dialogue leads in my mind. Dialogue is what's sort of leading me. And then I go back and fill it in. And so I tend to write short, and I need to like go back and think through, like, you know, I'm not just the actor with dialogue. I need to be the set designer, and I need to be the director, and I need to like create this world and fill out the world as much as possible. Yeah, so I did think that, as I said, I did some revising with my agent first, and then I did some revising with my editor, and in both cases, it was, I knew they were right. They were notes that made sense to me, and it was saying write more. By and large, those were the notes. It was saying write more here or write more here.
And I want to bounce it back to Claire and Rachel. Mary Dixie just said dialogue leads her. And I'm curious, Claire, what leads you when you're writing?
Dialogue.
Dialogue.
I started out as a playwright, so I really relate to a lot of what Mary Dixie is saying. Okay, character leads me. So sometimes it's what a character sees, and sometimes it's what a character says.
And Rachel, how about you?
Sort of along the same line. For me, it's voice or style or attitude. There has to be something happening with the language, with the speaker, whoever that speaker is, that I find provocative and compelling, and I want to follow that voice and figure out what is animating it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And that leads perfectly into, I would love to hear you read from Night Bitch now. Will you tell us a little bit about what you're going to read, and then, like I said, dive right into it?
Sure. So this comes somewhat early in the book, maybe a quarter of the way in, where the mother, she's only called the mother or Night Bitch in the book, is having greater animalistic urges that she's having more of a problem keeping under wraps. She still doesn't quite know what's going on. And she's out to lunch with her son, who's 3. Voracious with death, she and the boy descended midday on their favorite lunch place downtown, just across from the library, one of those boutique grocery and deli places with aisles of upscale cookies and crackers, imported jellies, hot and cold buffets for the college kids, but also a favorite of the mommy set. A person could select just a pile of mac and cheese and 3 fingers of chicken if she wanted. She could purchase an entire plate of grapes. She could, if need be, arrange on a plate 2 cheese cubes as eyes and a kiwi slice as a nose, with a splat of strawberry yogurt below for a mouth. And there was also wine by the glass. The boy loved going there and instructing his mother exactly what to put on his plate. He pointed like a little general, grunted commands, clapped and sulked and bullied his way into precisely what he desired. The mother piled meatloaf slathered with ketchup, crumbly pieces of pot roast, more chicken fingers, a mountainous pile of a lovely baked corn concoction, the immensity of which made her son clap for joy, for he too loved the baked corn. In a separate small bowl, she dolloped mac and cheese. At the cash register, the store girl weighed her poundage of meats and allowed herself a momentary glance at the mother. The mother smiled and the boy laughed, and the mother said, "Totally PMSing." And the girl laughed uneasily and pressed buttons on the register. "Totally," the store girl said. The mother and the boy sat side by side at one of the outdoor tables. She set the bowl of macaroni before him and cut a chicken finger into small bites, which she arranged on a napkin. She was unusually silent as she did this, distracted by her hunger and the smell of the meat. The mother may have been in some sort of animal trance, cutting the chicken finger, yes, but doing it without knowing what she was doing. She could only focus on her hunger, a hunger that filled up every space inside her until she was nearly crazed. She turned to her plate. Ugh, the glory of the meatloaf, the suppleness of the muscle fibers as the pot roast fell apart. She used a fork, and then she used her hands, and then she simply allowed her face to fall upon the pile. And you could suppose this was some sort of worship. The mother, with head bowed, taking the foodstuffs directly into her body. There was a purity to such an act. The boy watched with wide eyes for a moment and then screamed with glee and did the same, plunging his face into the mac and cheese and then sitting up with a noodle stuck to one cheek, cheese on his eyelids. He clapped. The mother continued in her fugue, the feel of the meat in her throat filling her. The boy reached over to take a bite of the corn and she growled low and quiet, and he retreated to pick up the chicken tender in his mouth and shake it side to side. She gulped the meat down and moaned with the taste of it, snuffled and chomped, and then nudged the pile of corn with her nose toward her son. He picked it up with one pudgy hand, slammed it into his mouth, and closed his eyes as he chewed. She ate and ate and ate. With a singular animal focus, she ate. She licked the plate clean, and when she arose, she saw that all the mothers around her had quieted. Even the businessmen were off their phones watching. She picked up her napkin and calmly wiped her face. She took a very deep breath. She would act natural, play it cool. She would not cry. She would not cry. Horrifically, she met eyes with a man at the next table over, a guy with a smart haircut and an open-collared button-down, his briefcase beside him on a chair. Hungry, he said, not a question, but more a verbal fist bump, a somewhat odd acknowledgement of what had just transpired. Oh, she said as her face flushed red. She turned away quickly and tried to laugh. Ruff, she said playfully to her son, unable to muster a lighthearted chuckle. They were just playing. It was doggy games. She was a good mother, and this was just a game, she said to herself, to anyone who might have asked. Ruff, ruff, the boy barked back, his face alight with joy and slathered with cheese. She patted his head and wiped his face, and he dived back into his food, and the mother had a very dignified sip of water. It seemed that folks had gone back to their lunches, but she did not altogether look because it was too horrifying, this loss of self-consciousness she had experienced, the overwhelming hunger that took her and drove her into some other state in which only smell and taste and hunger mattered. Okay, she said quietly to herself, taking a deep breath. Okay. Mama, the boy screeched. He loved her, every way she was. Be doggy, he said, and she smiled and signed, all done, as she said it, flipping her palms toward him. All done, honey, more doggy later.
Thank you so much for that. I said this after all three readings, but I'll say it again. All three of you read beautifully. I've been to many readings where it's not always the case. So I just want to thank all three of you for making it fun and just exciting to hear your words. We have a few questions in the Q&A. We have about 25 minutes left, but I still have a few questions just to get in, like keeping on that nitty gritty. Oh, and Susan says so true. Thank you, Susan. Yes, your readings are great. We talked about finding an agent, the editing process, and Rachel, you're still in the midst of it. It will be published, but I do want to just talk about like the lead up to publishing and how you feel. And Rachel, we'll start with you. How are you? Because you're doing it, and Claire and Mary Dixie, it has published, so maybe they forgot kind of that feeling. But how are you doing?
I am doing okay. I mean, I'm sort of in a idiosyncratic position where I've really, for the past 9 months, been focused on another huge project. I'm actually feeling a little panicked because that is not done, and I haven't really turned my attention to book promotion, book tour, readings, whatever, what have you. But I think, 2 months out isn't too shabby to kind of start looking very pointedly in that direction. And right now is, like I had a call today with the Canadian publicity team. I had a call probably a month ago with the US publicity team. And so things are kind of starting to happen now. Like this is happening, starting to talk about the book. And so that feels really exciting. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe Claire and Mary Dixie can relate with this. Like I've been in the literary world for, decades, for 20 years, but I still have never published a book. So it all feels very new, but also exciting in that I can kind of use, like the connections I've made over 20 years and to kind of help promote the book. And I get to reconnect with friends I haven't seen in a while, to do events with them. And of course, COVID makes everything different too, because everything is still online, is still virtual. So what I'm doing is working with my publishing team on virtual events, and then also using my own resources and own connections to do some in-person outdoor events, because I do think people are going to want to see each other and go to events this summer, and trying to do that in a way that feels safe. So yeah, I'm just kind of like, I'm excited to hear what Claire and Mary Dixie have to say, because they've been through it, and to get any words of wisdom from them.
And yeah, Claire, how was it for you, especially being on a university press? It's slightly different than a bigger press. What was the lead up to publishing like for you?
I think it's very different at a university press. So I'm sure my experience is probably quite different from what you will experience, Rachel, and what you've experienced, Mary Dixie. There was no like team. It's one person who's responsible for promotion for God knows how many titles at this press. And so I I didn't self-publish, but I really had to self-promote. And that meant kind of like what Rachel was saying about calling on, decades of contacts. I reached out to anyone who would talk to me, just so I could understand what the heck was going on, like how this worked, what you were meant to do, what a publicist would do, even if I couldn't hire a publicist, and what could I sort of approximate. I learned to actually use social media, kind of, because I hate social media, and I hadn't been on Twitter since like 2009 or something. And that's not really where I live social media wise. And through all those conversations with people who were kind of closer to the publishing world than I was, because I'm just a high school teacher. I don't like, I did an MFA, but I don't know anything about that literary publishing space. I had so many wonderful conversations with really generous people, and they connected me to different people that I could talk to. And that was how I ended up meeting Jeff Waxman, who connected me with this event. So people have been really gracious and lovely, but I had to reach out and ask them to talk to me. And it like the buildup was exciting and thrilling, but it was also very like whatever I could make happen, kind of.
Definitely. And Mary Dixie, how about you? I mean, you're on Minotaur. It's a bigger press than a university press. What was the lead up like for you? How were you feeling back in March, right?
So actually, my book comes out May 25th.
Oh, was it not?
Has not been published yet.
Wow. See, I am bad at. It does say May 25th, not 3/25. See, I don't know anything about that. So you're in the midst of all this. So your book's out in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, yes.
Yeah.
And it's published in the UK in 2 days, but it's in 2 weeks. So now is sort of the height of the excitement, anxiety, and nerve-wracking. I guess I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I definitely don't know what I'm doing. And I'm trying to do stuff like social media, which does not come naturally to me at all. But I'm trying to get better at those kinds of things. I'm very fortunate that I have amazing publicist and marketing at Minotaur Books and St. Martin's Press. But I'm also, as both Rachel and Claire said, I'm also calling anyone that I know and asking for help. So any person who could possibly help me to promote the book, I'm calling them and emailing them and asking if, you know, so yes, it's all consuming, and also, you know, it's so exciting. It's almost like I wish I could enjoy it. I wish I wasn't nervous and could enjoy the lead up, but because I find it really, you know, nerve-wracking, and I want the book to do really well, and I and it feels like there's so much at stake, or for me, it feels like there's so much at stake. So so it's hard to relax and just have fun, but I'm having fun this evening, except that my screen keeps freezing up. I apologize for that, but I'm having fun talking to all of you. But it is nerve-wracking. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's nerve-wracking to be so close to something that you've been looking forward to for so long.
And I think it's important to repeat that, and it is nerve-wracking, and it takes a village to make a book work. It's you're alone for such a long time writing it, and then you may find an agent, you may find a contest, you may find whatever, but like, yeah, like I can't even imagine the lead up to it, and that's why I always ask the question, because how is everyone doing? We have about 15 minutes left, and there are some questions from readers that I'll read and just put out to all three of you. A lot of it is about the process of publishing, and I'm glad, because I think transparency is key in the literary world right now. I'll just kind of, let's see. Which one? Okay, I like this one. We'll go with this one first. How did you decide that you had the story that needed to be told? Were there any doubts once you were writing it that it was the story that you wanted to make your debut? And whoever wants to go first can go, and I can also repeat anything.
I can go. This book was going to be written whether anyone other than me read it or not. It felt like something I needed to get out on the page, something that was going to help me process an experience. And not all writing, well, probably all writing for me is that to some extent. Some of it, you know, some of my writing can be more, oh, I want to kind of experiment and like do a formal experiment. But this was not that. This was a catharsis. And so in that regard, the book was going to get written. And it felt very essential to me. It felt essential to me emotionally. And I think artistically was maybe secondary. But it was also, you know, like an interesting artistic endeavor for me. And I think I always write for myself first. If I'm not, you know, entertaining myself or doing something that I think is interesting, why would anyone else want to read it? I mean, it's so hard, right, to captivate an audience. And so ultimately, I'm doing things that interest me, that I think are provocative and compelling. And that's kind of, and maybe like my judgment wasn't as good when I was 25, right? Like maybe the things that compelled me then weren't as compelling to like a larger audience. And that's okay, like that was part of me learning how to write and learning like what I liked and like what was interesting to me about literature and books. And so, yeah, going back to the question, how did you decide you have a story that needed to be told? I mean, it was a story I needed to write and I wanted to hear. And obviously, I guess I didn't really have doubts. I just thought sometimes I was like, this story is crazy. Like, it might be too crazy for people and too absurd, but I had fun writing it and I think it's cool. And that's kind of what I use these days to decide what to work on.
Mary, Dixie, or Claire, how about you? How did you decide that this story was the one that you needed to tell?
I don't know that I made that kind of a clear and conscious decision about it, but I do think, and this is sort of a little bit along the lines of what Rachel was saying. I do think that like for every time in your life, you have a story to tell and it's very different and it keeps changing. So like right now, or in the last, whatever, few years, this was the story that I had to tell. And I think there'll be another story that I have to tell next. And there was another story before that that I had to tell. And some of those are going to appeal to people more and some are going to appeal less. And you just have to write what you know how to write and hope for the best.
And Claire, how did you know this book was the book?
I think that this was the first story that seemed like it just had enough legs to be a book. I was like, oh, this could work. And the sort of main teacher in my writing program insisted that we write novels and not short stories. I think he just thought that we were going to doom ourselves in publishing if we wrote short story collections. And it turns out short stories are actually really useful for literary magazines, and I had to like go back and learn how to write a short story. But I think I've often, for a very long time, I found plots to be very elusive, and this seemed like it had a plot, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just go with this, and it worked. But like the novel I'm working on right now comes from a very deep place of anger and disappointment with society. So it feels like it's a more direct, like, I must write this story. Whereas Silver Beach, I was like, I could write this story. I'll just give it a go.
Yeah. And then just moving along, because I want to make sure we get as many questions as I can. I'm sorry, I'm bad at, I was like, oh, we're going to have so much time at the end. And now I'm like, oh, this one is about advice on how to reach out to agents. How do you approach them? Even figuring out who to approach. And they say it's quite daunting without many connections. So any advice you have on that first step of finding agents and where to look and how to connect?
I can jump in really quickly because I had I just started from scratch. I didn't know anybody. And the people in the faculty in my program weren't helpful as far as agents went. They had agents who were very like high status and they wouldn't talk to us. So I just read a lot of blogs and listened to a lot of podcasts, and I got a lot of conflicting. I sort of like sorted through a bunch of conflicting pieces of advice, like agents who would be interviewed and insist that you give a really detailed plot outline from beginning to end in the query, and others who said, oh, no, tell the ending in the query letter, to the point where I felt confident that I had some sense of what it could be. And I sent my query letter to a whole bunch of friends I trusted to read. And so I feel like I revised the query letter to the point where I felt really good about it. And then just from there's just so much advice online. And from seeking that kind of exhaustively, I got the very clear sense that you should do your research as much as possible. And some agents also, like, they want you to know who they are, but they don't say who they are on the internet and don't say anything about what they like, or even who they represent. So you have to do a lot of, like, Query Tracker is a good resource. You have to do a lot of digging. And if you really can't find out about someone, don't query them. But if someone does an interview, or if you just can look at their list and pick 5 writers and, like, maybe try to figure out who they are, and if you have anything in common with them, then yeah, you just need like 2 or 3 lines that make it seem like you know that they're a specific person. And obviously, like, follow their advice or their guidelines, their submission guidelines to the letter, because they're all different.
Rachel or Mary Dixie, do you have any advice?
I could say, I mean, this is some of the same things Claire said, but you want to be very specific about the agent you reach out to and know as much as possible about that person, and know that who else they represent, and know what they like or don't like, and just the more you know, the better your chances are, I think. You don't want to just sort of blindly, in my opinion, I don't think you want to blindly just send out a bunch of query letters to whoever. And you can look in the acknowledgements of a lot of books and find books that feel similar to yours in some way.
That's great advice, definitely.
And then see who that person's agent is. So that's one possibility.
The only thing I have to add is to not rule out younger agents or newer agents, because oftentimes they're real hungry. They're really willing to take on something that's maybe a little riskier or harder to sell, but that they really love. So to also, I mean, sometimes it can be harder to get in with an agent who's acknowledged, in the back of a book, who is more established, who is the agent of your professors. Not impossible, but, also saying, okay, well, are there some, like, I think there's even something in, like, Publishers Weekly that's like up and coming agents. So just to kind of, like, nose around the industry and, like, pay attention, like Claire said, read blogs. And if someone seems like they're the right vibe, like, reach out to them, spread the net as wide as you can, while also being informed.
And sort of team up with other friends who are in the same boat as you. I had a friend who was trying to figure out the exact same thing I was doing. And so we just kind of compared notes a lot.
Yeah. And while you all were talking, I was thinking of the Substack I subscribe to. They don't pay me. I'm not getting kicked back. But Kate McKean, I think, is really transparent on, like, helping writers figure out the literary agency. And I'll put that name in the chat for everyone. We have about 6 minutes, and I know I have to kick it back to the 215 Fest at some point right before. But quickly, like a tweet advice here. We'll go for a tweet length. What do you wish you had done or known before your book came out? So I guess before right now, because some of your books aren't out. What is, like, your tweet advice that you wish you knew? Or maybe you don't even know it yet because your books aren't out, except for Claire's.
I'll say really quick, I got a good piece of advice from someone at Santa Fe Writers Project. He said, just think of your promotion as building an audience for your next book. Don't worry that the only people who are going to read this book are people who know you. And I was able to make peace with that.
I heard, to kind of go off of that, I heard something really great from my Canadian publishing team today. The marketing lead was like, because I was like, oh, I had all these great ideas for, tour, and none of them will work now because it's just all online. And she was like, the life of your book is long. Like, you will publish it this year and you will publish a paperback next year. And then there will be even more after that. And she's like, so let's just see this launch as like a starting point on a much longer journey, you know, even to a second book. And I think that's a really great way to frame it and to put it in perspective.
This is not exactly a perfect answer to the question, but it's like advice, sort of a general advice, that when you're working on a book, even before you get to the point of sending your manuscript out or trying to sell it, there are a lot of people that you'll meet along the way, and you just never know who's going to be able to help you. So, you know, the friends, acquaintances, stay in touch with your friends and your acquaintances, and then at some point, one of those people might be able to help you, either to get an agent or to get it published or something.
I agree 1,000,000%. That's really good advice.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for answering all these questions and talking so openly about your experience. I'll turn it back over to the 215 Fest in a second, but I always end everything I do with one question, and it's what local bookstore, what indie bookstore can we get your book at that you support? And I'll start. I know I'm not from Philly. I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, but to shout out a Philly bookstore, Uncle Bobby's definitely is, if you're in the Philly area, and most of you are because it's the Philly festival, but Uncle Bobby's is who I'll shout out. Does anyone want to shout out an indie bookstore that you support?
I'll give a shout out to Prairie Lights in Iowa City. They're still alive and selling books, and would love to sell you a book.
I'll shout out 192 Books in Chelsea and Book Culture in Morningside Heights, both in New York City.
I'll shout out Community Bookstore in Park Slope. Community Bookstore is an amazing bookstore.
My former neighborhood bookstore. It's great.
Yeah, and then we have A Novel Idea, Harriet's, Joseph Fox. I will turn it back over to Andrew with 215 Fest. Thank you so much for letting me host this, and thank you, Rachel, Claire, Mary, Dixie, for being so open and honest about your experience. I think it's so vital for up-and-coming writers and writers who are established to hear what this is like. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Amazing. I just want to take a quick moment and wrap us up and just say to everyone who attended, thank you so much for attending tonight's event as part of the 20th anniversary celebrations of the 215 Festival. And a real warm thank you so much to Mary Dixie Carter, Claire Cox, Rachel Yoder. This was lovely. I think someone also mentioned that in the chat. It really was. Thank you for sharing your passages and your novels and sharing with us your journey. Thank you, Adam, for guiding us through the conversation. It was just, I was glued to the conversation and the words, and there was just a lot of emotion in all of it. I want to just share some things I called out in the chat. If you did enjoy today's event, please keep up with the festival events all year long. Subscribe to our newsletter at 215festival.org. Everyone who attended tonight will get a short survey. Please do participate and let us know your feedback. We would love to hear from you. And last but not least, we hope that you will join us at other events at the festival. It's week-long through Saturday, a lot of great programming, and we are ending the festival with our literary dance party on Saturday night. It really is cute. It's going to be amazing. I hope some of the authors can attend. It's called Footnotes, and we would love to see you all there. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I just had so much fun. I hope you all did too. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night.